It's becoming a nightly occurrence for the New York Knicks. Out to a big lead early, struggles in the second half, and ultimately losing the game. It was no different last night down the Jersey Turnpike, losing to the Sixers in James Harden's home court debut for the Sixers. What's up, beautiful people? Welcome to the Putback with Ian Begley live. I'm Chris Williamson alongside our SNY NBA insider, Ian Begley. Today, we're joined by a familiar face on SNY, Dan Graca, who also hosts Knicks pre and post game on ESPN Radio in New York. And also here is Steve Popper, who covers the Knicks for Newsday. We're streaming live on SNY.TV, as well as our Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube channels. As always, we tip things off with the baseline. And Ian, Tom Thibodeau got some questions about the point guard situation last night after Alec Burks really put up a stinker, 2 of 11 from the field. And Miles McBride only played 1 minute. And we'll get to him in a bit. But how much is this point guard situation, or the lack of having one, affecting the Knicks' current performance?
Yeah, I don't think it helps. You know, when you look at the fourth quarters, and I'll go to Evan Fournier, what he talked about after the Philly loss at home, just guys not knowing where to go with the ball, unsure of what to do, second guessing themselves. To me, that screams the lack of a floor leader and somebody who can settle you down, get everybody in the right spots. And, you know, Derrick Rose played that role for this club last year after he got traded. He's been hurt this year, but certainly the need for point guard has been there in large part over the last 2 decades for this team, and it remains such as they enter into another offseason.
Yeah, that's why it's so frustrating for Knicks fans, because it's been, over 2 decades where they have not had a stable point guard, somebody that can lead them down the stretch. And why does there need to be, though, more consideration beyond just the season's over, play the young guys when it comes to Tibbs and the rotations that he puts out on the floor, Ian?
You know what? My best guess there is part of it is, with Evan Fournier and Alec Burks, those are guys who are under contract for next year. And so when you pivot to playing the young guys ahead of veterans with the idea of developing those young players, and you're saying we don't care as much about wins and losses, that has an impact on the locker room. So my guess is that at least is a factor, the idea that you don't want to fully lose Burks or Fournier because they're going to be around next year. And you might do that by getting them out of the rotation and playing young guys ahead of them. However, if you fall all the way out of this thing and there's no shot for you to get to that 10th seed, I think you have to get to a place where you're playing Miles McBride regular minutes, because you want to see what you have in him going into an offseason where, again, we talked about it, you're looking for a lead guard. I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing Jericho Sims now get minutes. The Knicks need to find out what he could be in the future because of the uncertainty at the center position.
Yeah, and Steve, specifically going back to Miles McBride, do you believe he should be getting more playing time in relation to Alec Burks, especially because when Burks is having an off night, you should have somebody coming off the bench who can give you a little bit of a spark?
Yeah, I think basically what Ian said, that, I mean, we all know Thibodeau, tanking doesn't work by trying to lose a game. It's not playing your best players. It's if Derrick Rose was healthy, not using him or cutting Julius Randle's minutes. Said that, that's how it happens. So I do think going young here is a good idea, as far as not giving things up. And remember, Fournier and Burks were very openly available at the trade deadline. So as far as planning the future with them, I think they've already kind of made it clear that they don't consider them a backbone to the organization here. I think we've seen it with Jericho. They could be playing Taj Gibson. Nerlens Noel, they say, is not quite ready. But, you could be playing Taj, especially against a player like Embiid. That's a big task to ask. And I think the same thing with McBride. He played nearly 40 minutes the night before in Westchester. So I didn't expect we're going to see a lot. And look, we don't see practice. Thibodeau knows his guys. I think he's shown he'll play Grimes, he'll play Sims.
Right.
If you look at the guys that are playing, RJ Barrett, they're all young guys. So it's not like he doesn't play youth. So I've got to believe that he feels that McBride is not ready for that role yet. He obviously, we all thought he'd be great for Thibodeau because of the defense under Huggins at West Virginia. He's a 94-foot defender, the whole length of the court. He's scored in the G League, but that's different. I think, if he can show that, that he can do this, that's a step forward. Derrick Rose is so important to this team. I think that's kind of allowed them to look to the future that, maybe this isn't a year they were ever going to contend anyway. So, if Derrick Rose sits and you somehow wind up in the lottery and you get lucky, more win for you that you get Derrick Rose back next year and you're building from there.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously that was a huge blow when they released the news that, he had a skin infection that would delay his comeback to the team after the All-Star break. And for Burks, just a combined 15 points over the last 2 games, not getting it done. But Dan, another young guy who's been really amped up by the Knicks fan base as far as wanting him to get more playing time is Cam Reddish. Do you believe he should be getting more playing time in relationship to Evan Fournier?
Well, it's 2 different questions, right, Chris? Should he be getting more playing time versus will he be getting more playing time? And I think first and foremost, it goes back to the guy you just mentioned in Derrick Rose. Who would have thought at the beginning of the season that a guy like Derrick Rose in this part of his career would be someone who makes or breaks the fortunes of the Knicks? But in a lot of ways, that's kind of what happened here, right? And I think that, look, if and when Derrick Rose does come back this season and he's healthy enough to play, that's another guy that's going to be getting minutes over Cam Reddish here. It's been speculated, it's been reported that Tom Thibodeau wasn't necessarily on board when they acquired Cam Reddish, right? He didn't want him here. This was a front office move. So, at first you're thinking that this is maybe Thibs and maybe trying to stick it to the front office and not playing Reddish because, hey, this isn't my guy. I don't want him here. Tom's still trying to win games. Any head coach is not going to mail it in because, look, last year you make the playoffs. Last year, he's the coach of the year, and he did an outstanding job, and everything was fine and dandy last year. But this season, it's been a complete 180, and now we've already heard all these rumors about the disagreements between Thibodeau and William Wesley, and maybe there's a little bit of an unsettled, dynamic going on there between those 2 sides. And, I mean, we've seen this before from this franchise to where you might think that, things are headed in one direction, and all of a sudden they might pull the plug and then decide to surprise us all in the offseason. So I think Tom's trying to win games first and foremost. Now, this trip they're going on out west, I mean, if you still think that they have a pulse right now, realistically, I think by the time they're done with this trip, there's going to be little to play for here. So, yeah, absolutely. You should be in that mode here in the next couple of weeks of starting to see some of these other guys, Reddish specifically. But they're also going to play Fournier because of what Steve said, like the investment that they have in this guy. I mean, he's still under contract for 3 more years, whether you like the move, whether you don't like the move. And I think that obviously they've oversold a little bit here, but they're going to play him to save face a little bit and saying, yeah, this is the guy we paid all that money to, and we want him to produce, and we want him to make threes and all that stuff. But we'll see where it plays out.
Yeah, it's going to be very. Go ahead,
I was going to say, just to add to that, look, this question of if they're in it still or not is going to be answered, I think, very quickly. They've started with a brutal stretch out of the break. We're flying to Phoenix today, even without Devin Booker and Chris Paul. I think they won by about 30 last night against Portland. This is a road trip that can basically end it. And, I think we all know that they're not a contender this year. They're not making the 10th seed would not be a win for them. And I think any talk of that is going to be over in a couple of days.
Yeah. And I'd be very interested to see the shift in the philosophy or the approach from Thibs and the players once we do get past this West Coast trip to see if they change, their approach to the season. And as always, we ask for fan love. So please put your questions in the comment section or whatever platform you're watching on. We'll get to as many as we can. And then you've been following the Knicks for a very long time. So when you look at this whole situation and you kind of touched on some different issues, who do you believe bears the most responsibility for the way this season has turned out?
Well, I think, look, everybody's going to have a hand in it. That's the old saying, right? You have to own it. Everybody collectively within the organization. Doesn't matter if you're a player. Doesn't matter if you're a coach. Doesn't matter if you work in the office. Doesn't matter if you stock the vending machine. It doesn't matter. Everybody plays a hand in it. But I think it starts with the front office, right? I think that, not to say that they were maybe a little giddy after what happened last year, that they finished the 4th seed in the Eastern Conference and thinking, hey, we've arrived. But I mean, if you looked at the way the Eastern Conference played itself out during the offseason, some of these other teams got better, and you knew that they would be better. And the Knicks, I think that they were going to be hard-pressed to match what they did a season ago. And obviously, it's been a big struggle for them. The 2 moves they made over the summer, the 2 big ones with the new backcourt in Kemba and Fournier. I mean, when they happened, it was like I was scratching my head. And I know that Kemba was a great story, a local guy, and they were hoping that he could recapture some of that magic. But guys, I mean, what did we realistically expect of Kemba Walker at this point in his career? The Boston Celtics got rid of him. When they traded him away, they attached the number 1 pick because that's how desperate they were to get rid of him. You don't just give up number 1 draft picks for nothing here. That's how much that should have told you something right there. So they made a huge commitment to him, didn't work out. They made a huge commitment to Evan Fournier, Why? Because he had a good game in the Olympics against Team USA. Is that what they saw? And they said, shoot, we got to lock this guy up, give him 4 years. But I think that was really the foundation of where this season kind of went south here. And then you throw in the fact, look, I mean, Julius Randle, we've talked about it a ton. This guy was an all-NBA player last year, and this season he's left a lot to be desired. So even though RJ has picked up his game and risen it to another level, I think all of those subtractions have led to where they are right now, which is on the outside looking in for a playoff spot.
Yeah, Dan, you mentioned everybody, right? I think it's the coaching staff too, because Tom Thibodeau clearly hit all the right buttons last year. And this year, it hasn't been the same. Like the lineups and the rotations haven't yielded the results that the Knicks were looking for. So I agree with you. I think it's everything. I think to point just to Tom Thibodeau or just to the front office, just to Julius Randle, I don't think that's realistic because so many things went right for them last year to be as good as they were. And so many different things have gone wrong this year for them to be as bad as they are right now.
Yeah. And one of the go ahead, Steve.
I was gonna say, as much as I could be critical of the front office at times, I don't think the Kemba was a terrible move because it was a high reward, low risk. It's a cheap contract and it's a movable deal. I think this summer, somebody that's going to want an expiring contract that you're going to want to attach in a deal. And the Fournier thing, look, it was a little bit of a panic move because they looked so bad offensively against Atlanta in the playoffs. But I think if we look at last year, we can say they should have brought back Peyton and Bullock and been a defensive team again. But every analytical number showed there was some things that were going to regress to the norm here. They were what we call the luckiest team against open threes last year. Things that worked out perfect last year didn't work out perfect this year. So the defense was worse. The offense. If in your mind you planned on Kemba and Derrick Rose splitting minutes, that would keep the two of them healthy and able to do it. It just hasn't worked. Derrick's been hurt. Kemba didn't work out. They don't put the ball in his hands for pick and roll like he excels at. It's still a Julius Randle point forward team. So I'm not sure any of this was really unexpected. I don't think any of us, Ian, I would agree. I'm sure you agree that none of us picked them to be 4 seed again or anything like that. We thought there was going to be a drop off this year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you knew there was going to be a drop off, but to this point, I don't think anybody expected, especially the defensive drop off, like how significant it's been, and then the offensive production that you acquired Kemba and Evan for, you haven't really seen all year. But we've got some fan questions coming in for Dan, and Nathan is asking you, Dan. Tibbs is saying the defense is the problem right now. How does he not think Deuce can help in that regard? It's pretty clear that Burks cannot stay in front of smaller and quicker guards.
Well, I mean, you guys said it a little bit earlier, right? When you talk about Deuce McBride and playing under Bob Huggins at West Virginia, kind of that like junkyard dog mentality, that was one of the things that made him attractive to the Knicks. And even on draft night, you thought, okay, this is a guy that might contribute, but there's more to it than just that, especially if you are a young player in the NBA. And look, Tom is an experienced coach. Tom is a guy that, throughout the course, remember, his last stop before he got to the Knicks in Minnesota, they had a lot of young talent on that team, right? Karl Anthony Towns in the early part of his career, for example, when Wiggins was up there. And, unfortunately, that kind of rubs some of the young players the wrong way. You have to be a certain type of player to play for Tibbs. And, not to say that McBride isn't that guy or can't be that guy, but I think he wants to see more from them. And when you look at the rest of this group, I think it ties into what we said earlier, that I think that, they're trying to win. Now, you got 20 games left. If we don't see a little bit more McBride the rest of the way as his team continues to fall out of it, then I would be surprised there, no doubt about it. And it is pretty stark when you look at defensively, like what's happened to this team, right? I mean, that was their MO last year. That's the MO of any Tom Thibodeau coach team. You were first in the NBA last year, and now you've had this significant drop off. Reggie Bullock is a guy they miss. Say what you want about him, as an outside shooter, but Reggie Bullock was their best perimeter defender, guys. Let's not forget about that last season. And I think that they miss him on the defensive end. And the other thing, last year, when the season ended going into 2021/22, they wanted to up the pace a little bit offensively.
Yeah.
They wanted to play with a little bit more pace. So if you want to play a little bit more run and gun, unfortunately, you're going to have those lapses, down the other end of the floor. Last year, they took the 9th most threes per game in the NBA. Or 30th last year. They were 30th last year in threes per game. This year, they're 9th. So it just goes to show you that stark difference. They wanted to play a little bit more aggressive offensively. Hasn't paid dividends for them, though, on the other end of the floor where they've given up, obviously, a lot of points.
Yeah. And we are obviously been talking about a lot of negative storylines for this Knicks team, and deservedly so, because they haven't played well for most of the year. But one guy who's really started to develop even more is RJ Barrett. He's got 8 30-point games. It's the most for any player in the NBA under 21. And how has he elevated his game over his third season in this association, Ian?
I think you're seeing him make very quick decisions with the ball in his hand and attack. He's attacking the paint. And I think the ball is in his hands more than it had been, certainly at the beginning of this year when it seemed like the hierarchy was still being determined. But more recently, the ball is in RJ Barrett's hands, and he's done very well with it. Decision making, finding open teammates, and getting to the basket, getting to the free throw line. So, if nothing else with this Knicks team the rest of the way, at the very least, you're giving RJ Barrett a chance to expand his game, and he's done that. He's done that offensively, and he's also defended solidly at times. And so, to me, this is important because you're getting a chance to see Barrett in a different light heading into a summer where you can offer him an extension on his rookie deal, and also you're getting a chance to project him forward in a different way. And that's important because as you look to build this roster, you have to figure out what RJ Barrett can be 2, 3, 4 years from now. And that, I think, informs some of your decisions around personnel. So this run for RJ Barrett has benefited him. And I think it's also informed the Knicks about what they do going forward here with the group.
Yeah, and how prioritized he'll be as part of this core of the future. And Steve, specifically for you, you watch Knicks games all the time. How have you seen Barrett improve in this year alone to really elevate his game and make defenses, keep them honest?
Well, I think some of the things that Ian said are right on. And look, we look at the 46-point game and say breakout, he's a star now. But I think we've seen other things. One, he is a the defender who's wanted to take on the role this year of being the guy who takes on James Harden, Jimmy Butler. He wants to take on the best wing on any other team. So I think that's a big step. But I think we've seen as he's handled the ball, his assist percentage has gone up. His turnover rate has gone down actually every year that he's been in the league. So I think we're starting to see some maturity there. The shots, he's become last year and this year so much better from three. He's attacking the rim and finishing, tremendously. I think, do we think he's going to be the number one guy on a championship team? Maybe not, but maybe he's that second guy. And, if it means Randall gets moved at some point and he teams up with somebody else. I think one of the other things, as we talk about point guards, they just Randall and Barrett both handle the ball so much. Barrett has 7 assists last night against Philly. The ball is not in the hands of point guard. I actually think one big loss for them right now is Quentin Grimes, because I think he almost fits sort of what Thibodeau really wants in that other, if we don't put a title of point guard on it. Point guard doesn't handle the ball and set up the offense for the Knicks. Barrett and Randall do. Yeah. And Tibbs loves size and has used him defending point guards all year. For a rookie, I think he's liked what he gives, almost Elfrid Payton size, but with it, an athleticism and toughness and competitiveness that I think he thinks he can kind of fit in that spot of being a guy, not a pure point guard, not a point guard at all, really, but defends at that spot. Great perimeter shooter. I think that's kind of the fit more than McBride.
Yeah, it's interesting because you project that forward too. And if it's Barrett and it's Julius Randle, do you really need a ball dominant point guard? I know this was a conversation had internally last year going into free agency in terms of which guards could fit. They had a bunch of cap space and they had opportunities, to go after different types of guards, and some guards under consideration were guards that, could play off the ball and didn't need the ball in their hands to create. And so I think that's one conversation here going forward with the Knicks is how do you fit that lead guard around Barrett and Randall, and do you need that kind of ball dominant guard? And I think it's an interesting debate, and it's a really big piece for the Knicks moving forward because you have to get that right.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And that's why Kemba never really fit there.
Right.
What he does well, they weren't going to do.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is why I guess why the move, was a little questionable because, his philosophy or his style of play didn't exactly match up with Tibbs in the Knicks organization. But after the show, visit SNY.TV for complete coverage of last night's Knicks loss, plus the latest installment of Begley's Mailbag featuring questions on Obi Toppin, Julius Randle, and Mitchell Robinson. And speaking of Mitchell Robinson, Dan, he had 10 points and 7 rebounds last night in Philly. What do you think his future in New York is as it stands right now?
So hard to say, right, Chris? Because everybody loves Mitchell. He's a good dude. He's got a good personality. And at times, obviously he's a rim protector. We know that the presence he provides there down in the low blocks. But I still go back to the old theory of, your best stability is your availability. And has he been available more often than not, really, since he's been a New York Knick? And the answer is no. It seems like he's always hurt. That every time he goes down to the ground, you don't know if he's getting back up. Right. And
Yeah.
I want a little bit more assurance and a little bit more security from, hey, one of my starting players to know that I can count on this guy and I can rely on him. Look, I try to bring him back, but he's not a guy that I'm breaking the bank for to make sure that he's a foundational piece for this team. I think we've hit on it, throughout this show already. I mean, RJ Barrett, Julius Randle, some of the young guys you hope to maybe develop a little bit more here in the backcourt and on the wing. But is Mitchell Robinson an indispensable piece for this Knicks team? I mean, like I said, I'd love to have him back, but I don't know if that's somebody that you say, oh, we're going to completely crumble if we lose a Mitchell Robinson.
So you'd be fine if he maybe got traded for, some good pieces, or they signed him on a more friendly extension?
Yeah, because I don't think that he's like, if you're talking about a big three, for example, he's never going to be one of those guys. Like if you hope to build one of those with this team, he's not that guy. He's going to be a nice complementary piece that, until he goes out there and proves that, he's somebody you can rely upon night in, night out. And, you're not going to have to worry about him going down and getting injured. And the other thing, too, is, I know that he was extremely, extremely raw, right,
Yeah.
when he came into the NBA, extremely raw. In the time that he's been in the league, though, has he made enough leaps and bounds, at least with his, all-around game offensively, to where you say, okay, I like where this is going? And, what is the ceiling? Is there still more to go? I think there's still more to go for RJ Barrett. I'm not sure there's still more to go, at least offensively, for somebody like Mitch.
Well,
Yeah.
here's the thing with them, like in Mitchell Robinson, obviously they could do the extension until June 30th. But, we talked about it earlier. At one point, they were talking extension, and I think it was before the trade deadline. And I was told that they were pretty far apart on what Robinson's side was looking for, what the Knicks were willing to offer. To me, no matter how it plays out, if you're the Knicks and Mitchell Robinson walks for nothing in free agency, that's a miss, because you didn't trade him at the deadline and you would let an asset walk and not get anything back. So to me, at the very least, you got to do sign and trade. And that's a difficult transaction to pull off, because why would a team want to give up assets if they have the money to offer Mitchell a contract? So interesting dynamic there. We'll see how it plays out. But to me, you can't let him go for nothing.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, and I did hear at the deadline that some of the teams that were interested in him and are interested in him just didn't want to bite at the trade deadline, would rather play the free agency game this summer. But I think this is what, when we talk about youth, it's interesting to get a look at Jericho here, because he does have some similar skills. Mitch has improved defensively from being so foul prone his first year in the league, trying to block everything. He's become a smarter defender. But I think ideally, like, we all know that there was some interest in Miles Turner at the deadline, and a guy like that, whether it's him or just a lesser version, somebody who with the way Barrett goes to the rim, the way that Randall wants to operate in the mid-range, having a guy as an outlet there, as a who can shoot from the perimeter, which Mitch cannot do, is sort of a bonus for them. I almost wonder if feeling Mitch, kind of giving his role to Jericho and Nerlens Noel, who's still here, and maybe trying to find a guy who can give you some minutes and actually be a threat from the outside, changes up what their offense looks like.
So you feel like that's been the main reason why Jericho's gotten more minutes as of late, because he brings more to the table than a guy like Mitchell?
I think it's a similar skill set. He's very athletic. He's a tough kid. He doesn't challenge shots the way Mitch does, but he's strong for a rookie, number 59 pick. I think he's strong and athletic, and defensively offensively, same thing. Rim runner, can finish a lob. Hasn't shown a lot, but we have seen a couple times this year a little hook in the lane or something. I think it's good to get a look at him this last 20 games and see what you're getting here, and that's going to help you assess what the value you put on Mitch is. But I think what Ian said is true. He's an asset, and you can't let that walk for nothing.
Steve, on Jericho, just real quick, does he remind you at all of a guy that you used to cover way back, George Mikan? Is there any similarities, Sims and Mikan? I know you spent a lot of time around him, Minneapolis. What do you think?
I haven't seen the set shot yet, the two-hand set shot yet. But we'll see.
All 75 player there, George Mikan.
Yes, sir. You got to give him.
Right. That would be a high level for him to reach, and I don't have him there yet.
Yeah, maybe one day we will see. But make sure to watch Geico Sports Night all night and every night starting at 11 p.m. We always have highlights and reaction to every Knicks game, plus the latest news surrounding the team in between games. Ian Begley always swings by, so check out Geico Sports Night every night. And into the morning, we'll cover Durant's return tonight, right now. And Ian, what are your expectations for KD's first game back on the court since January 15th with that sprained MCL?
I would imagine that the Nets have him on some kind of minutes restriction. I don't think, they're going to push him, because the last thing you want to do if you're Brooklyn is get him out there and then have him re-aggravate something or push him too hard to where he's going to have to miss time. You need him on the court, obviously, the rest of the regular season, the rest of the way. So I would assume they're conservative tonight and early on with that injury. And obviously you want to get Ben Simmons, Kevin Durant, Kyrie Irving on the court together as much as possible. The thing that I go back to, though, when we talk about these three together is last year, Harden and those guys did not play a lot at all, and they looked phenomenal in the playoffs against Boston when everybody was healthy. Obviously, it's a different dynamic. Ben Simmons is not James Harden, but I wouldn't be as concerned with Durant and Kyrie not having a ton of time together entering the playoffs based on what we saw last season.
Yeah, I mean, the interesting thing there is, we just don't know what's going to happen with Kyrie, if he's ever going to be able to play home games, because of the technicalities, with the vaccine mandate. But going back to the Knicks, Dan, their next three games tip off at 10 or 10:30 East Coast time. So give us a reason to stay up and watch these games against the Suns, Clippers, and Kings.
If you're a nocturnal creature, I mean, that's one reason right there. If you maybe don't value your sleep as much, because other than that, it's going to be tough sledding. It really is. I mean, we think of it. They were just out on the West Coast 5 minutes ago. And if you ask me, that was the trip at the beginning of the month of February that pretty much finished them off. I mean, how many 20-point leads did they blow in a couple of those games out there, right? And I mean, even the one that they won miraculously, they very nearly blew that one at the end. And I know that maybe on paper, this one isn't as daunting. You guys mentioned earlier that it starts in Phoenix. You saw what Phoenix did last night, and that was without Devin Booker, without Chris Paul. I don't think they're taking the Knicks lightly, despite what their record says. And then you go to Sacramento, the Clippers, maybe they aren't as big of a challenge, let's say on paper, as some of these other teams, but they're not going to be easy. And then you got to Dallas, you got to deal with. Then you go to Memphis and John Moran, and then you come back here and it's Brooklyn. I mean, if they get one, maybe two tops, I think you sign for that. But I think once this road trip is over, you could pretty much understand where this team is in the overall pecking order. And we could pretty much just be playing out the rest of the season for pride, I think, over the last, what would it be, 14, 15 games.
Yeah. Steve, what about you? Give us a reason to stay up.
I think the best thing would be that if you could flip channels and if you're awake and find West Coast college games to start scouting lottery picks.
Conference tournaments, that's right.
Yeah. It's just look, I think this is a very tough trip for them. And look, I do think they're approaching it the right way. They're playing to win games, which is what you want to do. And I would say this: look, we've all heard the rumors about Thibodeau's status, and probably the best thing we've had for him is that Julius Randle has kind of recovered his play a bit. And is playing hard and doesn't seem distracted like he did for a while here. I think him and RJ Barrett being in Thibodeau's corner and they mimic him, they sound like him, is probably the best thing for him right now. The best argument he has that if he has the two stars in his corner, along with Leon Rose's belief, I think that's probably the best thing. So I think that's an indication here. If we keep seeing what they're saying they're going to do and play these games to win, I think that's important.
Ian, what about you? Give us a reason to stay up.
Couple of things. Yeah, if you're thinking about Tom Thibodeau's status, it's clear to me, at least over these last three games coming out of the break, the team has not quit. Now, are they playing for Thibodeau? Are they playing for themselves? Are they playing for each other? I don't know. But when a team quits on a coach, it's pretty clear when that happens, and that's never a good sign for a coach. So if you continue to see them compete on this trip, I do think that's a good sign for Tom Thibodeau. Other reasons to tune in, I guess it would be DeAndre Ayton in Phoenix. And then maybe you want to look at De'Aaron Fox in that Sacramento game, and maybe Terrence Mann with the Clippers. I don't know. You're looking at other players on these teams potential fits for the Knicks, because that's what you're looking at this point in any season for a Knicks fan. You're looking at the draft, you're looking at potential free agents, because it's not as much about what's happening on the court for your team at this point.
Yeah.
I was going to say, when they play Memphis again, like, you know, and you see John Morant, has that pain kind of softened and minimized just a little bit with the ping pong balls in the lottery, given how well RJ has played this year, that, you know, it wasn't a total consolation prize missing out on a guy like John Morant a few years ago?
No,
I don't think so, man.
Better and better.
Yeah.
I mean, RJ, no disrespect to RJ Barrett, he's been phenomenal the last month, but John Morant just seems like he's on another planet.
But you know something on that point, though? I mean, think about it. If you were going to redraft, you know, at least those top three, right now you can make a case. I might take RJ second, because I don't know what Zion's going to be the rest of his career. I mean, he's eating himself out of the league.
Yeah, I think you probably also slipped Darius Garland, who I think was 4 that year.
There you go.
Into that mix too.
Darius Garland there. But the thing about Zion, though, Dan, is he was an all-star, you know, when he was healthy. So when he's on the court, obviously, you know, he's a much better player than RJ Barrett. But I do understand, you know, the concern, you know, given the fact that we haven't seen him all year and he doesn't seem to be in great shape whatsoever. But that will do it for this edition of the Putback with Ian Begley. Our thanks to Dan Graca of ESPN Radio and SNY. And thanks to Steve Popper of Newsday. We are back to our classic format for the next 2 weeks. New episodes with great guests drop the next 2 Wednesdays at 4 p.m. For Ian, I'm Chris. We'll see you next week.